Ngozi stood by, helplessly, as nurses and doctors surrounded her daughters. Her head spun as she tried to make sense of it. One moment she was selling cassava at the market, an ordinary day, and the next, someone came shouting that her children were at the hospital. She hadn't even had time to drop her basket. It lay back at the market stall, abandoned, when she fled. What happened to them? Please, what's wrong with my children? She begged a nurse, her voice quavering, as the medical staff moved with urgency. Ngozi's day began in the soft light of dawn as roosters crawled across the quiet Igbo community. The village of Amorike was just waking up, and a gentle mist flowing to the fields beyond the houses. In the family compound where Ngozi lived, the morning was calm and ordinary. The compound itself consisted of two modest cement houses with tin roofs, painted a fading cream color. The houses were arranged around a shed yard, swept clean of dust every morning. This was a modern rural community, just simple brick homes with radio antennas poking into the sky. A long wall encircled the compound, with a metal gate that usually stood open during the day to welcome neighbors and kin. On this morning, Ngozi moved about the yard with purpose. She was a hard-working woman in her early 30s, strong from years of labor and motherhood. She tied a faded blue wrapper around her waist and balanced a large basin of cassava tubers on her hip. Her two young daughters trailed behind her like little chicks following a hen. Chinwe, the eldest at 9 years old, tried to help her mother by carrying a small basket of vegetables. 6-year-old Amara giggled as she chased a chicken that wandered near the porch, and 4-year-old Oledo clapped her hands at the sight, her round face lit with delight. "Be careful, Amara," Ngozi called gently, watching as the middle child nearly tripped over a stray bucket in pursuit of the chicken. Amara slowed down and flashed a shy grin. Ngozi smiled back. Mornings like this filled her heart with warmth. Her daughters were her pride and joy, and their laughter made even the hardest work worthwhile. Uloma stepped out from the other house in the compound at that moment, drawn by the cheerful noise. Uloma was the wife of Ngozi's brother-in-law. She had lived with them in the family compound for years. As she emerged, she adjusted her headscarf and offered a smile, a strange smile at the children's antics. "Good morning, Ngozi," she greeted quietly. "Good morning, Uloma," Ngozi replied, hoisting the basin of cassava more securely on her hip. She was slightly out of breath, a few strands of her hair escaping the scarf tied around her head. "I'm heading to the market soon. I need to sell these cassavas and buy some things." Uloma nodded. She was a woman in her late 20s, a bit shorter than Ngozi, with smooth dark skin and careful eyes that often looked down at the ground. "You're always so busy," she said softly. There was a hint of something in her tone. Was it wistfulness? But her words were polite as always. "Do you need any help with the girls today?" Ngozi looked at her children, who were now gathered around her legs. Chinwe stood protectively beside her mother, listening to the conversation. "I think they'll be fine," Ngozi said. "Chinwe will look after her sisters while I'm away, right?" She placed a loving hand on her eldest daughter's shoulder. "Yes, Mama," Chinwe piped up dutifully. At 9, Chinwe was already showing signs of her mother's responsible nature. She took pride in helping with her younger sisters whenever she could. Oloma's eyes flickered at the sight of Ngozi's hand on Chinwe's shoulder. For a brief second, an observant person might have noticed a shadow pass over her face, an expression of longing and sadness, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. She gave another small smile and said, "All right, if you need me, I'll be here. I'll keep an eye out as well." "Thank you," Ngozi replied warmly. She appreciated that Uloma was always quiet and seemingly helpful. In truth, she sometimes felt sorry for her sister-in-law. Uloma had been married to Ngozi's husband's younger brother for many years, yet they had no child of their own. In a community where children were considered a great blessing and a source of joy, Ulama's arms remained empty. Villagers would occasionally whisper about it. Some pitied her, others speculated on causes. Ulama herself rarely spoke of it, enduring the unspoken burden with a forced gentle smile. Ngozi tried to include Ulama in her family's life as much as possible. She often sent over plates of food to Ulama and invited her to play with the children or join in their small celebrations. Ulama always smiled and said thank you, but there was a distance in her eyes, as if she was separating herself from joy that wasn't hers. This morning was no different. As Ngozi prepared to leave for the market, she noticed Ulama lingering at the doorstep of her house, watching the children. Auntie, see what I drew, little Aledo cried out suddenly, running up to Ulama with a scrap of paper. On it was a childish crayon drawing of stick figure people likely meant to be their family. Ulama knelt and examined the drawing, her lips curving into that same gentle smile. This is beautiful, Ola, she said kindly. She tapped one of the stick figures. And who is this one? That's you, Auntie Uloma, Oledo said proudly. I drew you with a big sun because you like to sit in the sun in the morning. For a moment, Uloma's composure faltered. Her eyes glistened over so slightly, and she blinked rapidly. Thank you, my dear, she whispered, patting Oledo's head. Watching this from a few steps away, Ngozi felt a pang of empathy for Uloma. Surely, Uloma must yearn deeply for a child of her own to hold and love. Ngozi could only imagine that kind of pain. One day, God will answer for her. Ngozi thought to herself hopefully, as she often did. She never voiced those thoughts to Uloma directly, not wanting to stir up hurt, but she prayed in her heart that her sister-in-law would find happiness too. Girls, Mama has to go now, Ngozi announced, kneeling to give each of her daughters a quick hug. Chinwe, make sure you watch over your sisters. I'll be back by afternoon, okay? Chinwe nodded seriously. Yes, Mama, I will. She took Oledo's hand and asked Amara to stand by her other side. We will play in the yard or maybe draw more. Good. And listen to Auntie Uloma if she tells you anything, alright? Ngozi added, glancing at Uloma with a trusting smile. Uloma simply inclined her head. Ngozi rose and picked up a basket of goods for the market, placing it on her head and balancing it skillfully. Before she left, she noticed Uloma still looking at the children, a strange intensity in her gaze. Ngozi brushed it off and gave a final wave. I'll be back soon, stay well. As Ngozi walked out of the compound and onto the dirt road toward the village market, the sun was climbing higher, promising a warm day. She passed neighbors along the way, women with baskets, men pushing bicycles loaded with yams, children chasing each other. The chatter of daily life filled the air. Ngozi joined a group of women from the village who were also headed to the market, greeting them politely but not stopping to gossip. Her mind was on herself and on getting home early to her girls. Back at the compound, a quiet settled after Ngozi's departure. Chinwe tried to keep her sisters entertained. They settled on the veranda of their house, a shady spot in the mid-morning light, and began drawing again on bits of paper with old crayons. Amara was coloring a flower, and Oledo was scribbling shapes that made her giggle. Uloma watched them from her own doorway. She had gone back inside briefly after Ngozi left, but the sound of the girls' laughter and chatter drew her back out. She leaned against the door frame, hands clasped tightly together as if restraining herself. The sight of the three sisters playing peacefully stirred something in her chest. She felt that familiar ache, the bitterness that she tried so hard to hide. She remembered how just moments ago, Oledo had drawn her in the picture with a son, innocent, sweet child. Oledo saw her as part of their family picture, but Uloma felt like an outsider looking in. In the privacy of her mind, envy coiled like a snake. Why, God, she thought, despairing. Why did you bless Ngozi with 3 beautiful daughters? Why I have none? What have I done to deserve this emptiness? Uloma quickly wiped a tear that tried to escape. She must not let anyone see her crying. The villagers already whispered enough. She had to maintain her composure, her quiet, gentle facade. It was the only way to live day by day, pretend to be alright, smile through the pain. But each day, it grew harder. Each time she saw the children call Ngozi Mama, each time she saw her husband bounce one of the girls on his knee as an uncle, she felt something sour in her throat. Jealousy, shame, sorrow, all mixed together. She began to avoid lingering around the children too much, for fear that her real feelings might somehow show. However, today they were right there, and she was alone in the compound with them. She stepped forward and called out softly, Chinwe, Amara, Ola, what are you drawing now? Chinwe looked up warily at Uloma. She respected her aunt, but being the perceptive child she was, she sometimes felt uncertain around Uloma's quiet presence. Uloma rarely played with them the way some aunts did. Still, Chinwe answered politely, I'm drawing a house, auntie. Amara is drawing flowers. Oh, that's nice, Uloma replied, stepping closer. She moved slowly, almost in a daze, and sat on a low wooden stool, a short distance from the girls. The morning wore on. The sun climbed higher, and the air grew hot and still. The village was quieter now, as most adults were away at farms or the market. In the compound, only Uloma and the children remained. As noon approached, Uloma wiped sweat from her brow. A thought had been brewing in her mind all morning, forbidden and dark. She tried to push it away, but it kept returning, stronger each time. It was a thought born of her deepest resentment and grief, a thought of revenge against fate, a way to release the anger that churned behind her kind smiles. She glanced at the girls engrossed in their drawing and felt a twist of guilt. They were innocent. They had done nothing except be born to a mother who was blessed when she, Uloma, was not. Yet the bitterness spoke. It's not their fault. She argued with herself. But how can I continue to live like this? Invisible and in pain? Everyone thinks I'm quiet and good. They don't know the fire inside me. If I do something, perhaps then they would understand my suffering. Perhaps somebody will feel a piece of what I feel. Ulama's heart pounded at her own thought. She stood up and went into her house, shutting the door behind her. Inside the small living room, sparse, clean and lonely, she paced back and forth. She could still faintly hear the girls' voices outside. As she walked by her kitchen corner, her eyes fell on a pot and ingredient she had set aside to cook herself lunch later. Some slices of yam, palm oil, seasonings, yam porridge she had planned. It was one of her favorite comfort foods, even if she usually ate alone. She stopped pacing. In that charged, sunlit moment, a terrible resolve formed in Uloma's mind. If she cooked the yam porridge now and gave it to the children, she swallowed hard. She knew what she had in her storage, hidden at the back of her cupboard. An old packet of pesticide powder her husband had brought to kill rats in their storehouse last year. They hardly used it, but it was potent. Why did her mind jump to that? She trembled, a battle raging within. Images flashed through her head. Nights of crying silently, days of enduring pitying looks. The time a neighbor had casually said to her, "Don't worry, your own children will come one day." She had forced a smile while dying inside. The time her husband's family had held a naming ceremony for Ngozi's youngest baby. Everyone was so happy and dancing. And Uloma had felt like screaming because she knew people were also glancing at her, wondering if she was cursed or barren. Her vision blurred with tears of frustration and envy. In that haze, she found herself taking out the yams, peeling and cutting them with quick, jerky motions. She lit the stove. Her hands moved almost of their own accord, scooping palm oil, throwing in ingredients. Her mind was screaming at her to stop, but another part of her was fiercely determined. This pain must end, she muttered under her breath. I cannot carry it alone. She should feel it too. At a point, Uloma paused and almost turned off the stove, her conscience trying to reassert itself, but then she heard a burst of giggles from outside. The girls were laughing about something silly. That innocent laughter felt like a taunt to Uloma in a distorted state of mind. Her face hardened. She reached into the cupboard and pulled out the small packet of rat poison. Her fingers shook as she poured a small amount of the white powder into her palm. She hesitated, staring at it. One more memory stabbed at her. Just last week, someone at the market had congratulated Ngozi on how clever and beautiful her children were, right in Uloma's presence. Then turned to Uloma and said with a sigh, "It is the will of God," referring to her childlessness. The humiliation of that moment returned full force. Uloma poured the poison into the bubbling pot of yam porridge. A harsh sob escaped her throat as she stirred the pot, watching the powder dissolve into the rich orange stew. "Forgive me, forgive me," she whispered, not even sure to whom she pleaded, God, the children, or herself. When the yam porridge was cooked, Uloma wiped her eyes and composed herself. She took 3 clean plates and spooned the steaming fragrant porridge into it. The food looked inviting. Yam chunks softened to a delicious mash with greens and a shimmer of palm oil. No one would suspect anything was wrong by sight alone. Carrying the plate, Uloma stepped out into the bright midday sun. The children were now sitting in the shade of the lone mango tree in the yard, playing a clapping game together to pass time. They looked up as Uloma approached. "I made some lunch. Would you like to eat yam porridge?" Uloma asked, forcing a smile to her lips. Her own voice sounded overly cheerful in her own ears, unnatural. Chinwe blinked in surprise. Auntie Uloma had never offered them lunch before, at least not without their mother present. However, Ngozi had said to listen to Auntie Uloma, and besides, the food smelled good and they were starting to feel hungry. Chinwe was a bit hesitant, but Amara Anoledo, not sensing anything amiss, jumped up excitedly. "Yes, thank you, Auntie," Amara said, wiping her hands on her dress. "Yummy, I love yam," little Oledo chirped, hopping from one foot to the other. Uloma's fake smile stretched painfully on her face as she handed the first plate to Amara and the second plate to Oledo. The girls settled down on a low bench, each holding a plate brimming with porridge. Chinwe stood next to them, still empty-handed, unsure of what to do. She was taught to be polite and accept what an elder gave, but something felt odd about Auntie Uloma's sudden generosity. "And for you, Chinwe," Uloma said, turning to the eldest child. She held out the third plate. Chinwe looked at it and was puzzled. There was hardly any porridge on this plate, just a small puddle of stew with maybe one tiny piece of yam. It was almost empty compared to her sister's portions. "Auntie, there is nothing in it," Chinwe said innocently. Uloma stepped closer and lowered her voice so only Chinwe could hear. There was an intensity in her eyes that made the girl swallow nervously. "Chinwe, take it," Uloma whispered firmly. I will give you more later, but eat this for now and don't tell anyone I gave you food. It's a little secret, okay?" Chinwe's heart thumped. She didn't understand why Auntie Uloma was acting so strangely. Why was she only giving her a little and making it a secret? But she was a child, and the authority of an adult weighed on her. Slowly, she reached out and took the plate. The porcelain felt hot in her small hands. Uloma nodded approvingly, her fake smile gone now, replaced by a stony expression. "Good girl, now sit and eat quietly," she said. By now, Amara and Oledo were already blowing on their portions to cool down, eager to dig in. Chinwe climbed onto the bench beside her sisters, her mind uneasy. She stared at her nearly empty plate. Her stomach growled, but confusion and a small seed of fear made her hesitant to eat. She dipped a finger in the porridge sauce and licked it to taste. It tasted bitter, maybe too much seasoning. She frowned. Yam porridge should be a bit sweet and salty, not bitter. Auntie, this tastes funny, Amara said suddenly, making a face. She had taken a couple of bites. Oledo had also begun eating, but more slowly, her short legs swinging under the bench as she savored the treat. Just eat, it's good for you, Ulama said sharply, hovering nearby. Her voice had an edge that made Amara quickly fall silent, not wanting to upset Auntie Uloma. Amara continued to spoon the porridge into her mouth, though the strange taste made her wrinkle her nose. Chinwe watched her younger sisters eat with growing worry. Her own instinct told her something was wrong. She had only licked a drop and found it bitter. What if no? It couldn't be bad. Why would Auntie Uloma give them bad food? But the secretive way Uloma acted was alarming. Chinwe nervously poked the one small yam on her plate. In her guts, she felt she should stop her sisters from eating more, yet she didn't know how to without disobeying an elder. Within minutes, Amara started coughing. She set her plate down, half finished, and pressed her hand to her stomach. My tummy hurts, she whined softly. Oledo, who had eaten a bit less, looked at her sister with concern. Olama's hands clenched tightly as she watched the poison take effect. Panic rose within her. She hadn't planned beyond this moment, and now reality was crashing down. Maybe this was a mistake, a voice screamed in her mind, but it was too late to turn back time. Amara doubled over, sliding off the bench onto the ground. Her plate clattered on the dirt, spilling bright orange porridge. She began to retch violently. Oledo started crying. Amara, what's wrong? She cried. But then Oledo herself wobbled, her little body suddenly weak. She slumped against Chinwe. Auntie, something is wrong with them, Chinwe yelled, her voice high with alarm. Chinwe's own head was beginning to spin slightly from the tiny bit she tasted, but she was still conscious and focused. She jumped off the bench, trying to support Oledo, who was now wheezing, eyes rolling back. Ulama, backing away, eyes wide with horror at what she had done. I don't know, she stammered, raising her hands to her mouth. She looked around frantically. The compound was otherwise empty. If someone passed by outside on the road, they might not see inside the walls, and Ngozi was not due back yet. Chinwe screamed for help, a piercing cry that echoed off the compound walls. Somebody help! Amara is sick! Oledo is sick! The little girl's voice cracked with desperation. Ulama snapped out of her shock at the sound of Chinwe's screams. Fear of being caught red-handed overwhelmed her. She turned and bolted. Dropping the pretense entirely, she dashed behind her house towards the back of the compound where a cluster of plantain trees grew. She had to hide the evidence, the remaining porridge in the pot, anything. Chinwe barely noticed Ulama fleeing. Her attention was on her sisters. Amara was now lying on her side, body convulsing, foam appearing at the corners of her mouth. Oledo lay limp in Chinwe's arms, unresponsive except for faint, erratic breaths. Chinwe's own limbs felt heavy and a headache pounded in her skull, but she refused to lose focus. She kept screaming for help, tears streaming down her face, rocking little Oledo in her arms. The compound gate creaked as a neighbor passing by heard the commotion and rushed in. It was Ifoma, a woman who lived a few houses down the road. She saw the horrifying scene. 2 children collapsed and the elders sobbing for help. Ifoma shouted in alarm, calling out to anyone nearby. Soon, another neighbor, an elderly man named Papa Oke, came hobbling in. Together, they assessed the situation. Though neither had medical knowledge, it was clear the children were gravely ill. We need to get them to the hospital now, Ifoma cried. She scooped up Amara, who was closest to her, though Amara's small body had gone frighteningly still. Papa Oke lifted Oledo from Chinwe's arms, while Chinwe, dizzy but determined, stumbled along next to them, insisting, We have to help my sisters. What happened? Ifoma asked urgently as they hurried out of the compound and onto the road. Chinwe sobbing could only manage. They ate something. Until Mama gave us food, then they... She broke into a cough, nearly collapsing herself. The neighbor noticed the child's eyes rolling and realized she too was affected, if less severely. My God, were they poisoned? Papoke muttered, dread in his voice. It was unthinkable, but the evidence pointed that way. He had lived long and seen enough tragedies to recognize when children had ingested something toxic. The small group flagged down a motorcycle taxi and Okada that was passing by. The rider, alarmed at the emergency, stopped immediately. Between the three adults, they managed to support all three children on the motorcycle and themselves. A dangerously crowded ride, but no one cared about the risk at that moment. Ifeoma cradled Amara in front. Papoke sat at the back holding Oledo, and Chinwe was squeezed in between, leaning limply against Papoke. Go to Central Hospital fast, Ifeoma urged the Okada driver. He revved the engine and sped off towards the town's clinic, a trail of dust flying behind. Back in the compound, Uloma had emptied the remaining yam porridge onto the ground behind her house. Near some bushes, she flung the pot aside, her eyes shaking uncontrollably. She realized with sickening clarity that what she had done was irreversible. She heard the distant roar of the motorcycle and guessed the neighbors had taken the children to get help. A flood of panic and regret washed over her. What have I done? Oh my God, what have I done? She wailed softly to herself, grabbing her head with both hands. Uloma knew she could not stay here. If the children died, no, she couldn't even complete that thought. But if they did, or even if they survived and told what happened, everyone would know it was her. The look on Chinwe's face as she screamed would haunt her forever. Uloma's breath came in gasps. Her mind raced. Should she run away now? Could she? Where would she go? What about her husband? Her kind, loving husband who trusted her. She sank to the ground behind the house, wrecked with sobs of guilt and terror. In her heart, she had wanted Ngozi to suffer, but she hadn't fully realized that meant harming innocent children she would watch grow up. Now, their little faces swam before her eyes, and she felt like a monster. Meanwhile, at the hospital, the doctors and nurses sprang into action as the children were rushed in. The small town hospital was not very large, but it had an emergency room and a couple of doctors on duty. Ngozi arrived at the hospital not long after. Word had spread quickly from neighbor to neighbor until someone found her at the market. She came running in, breathless and frantic, barely understanding what had happened, only knowing her children were in danger. In the brightly lit emergency ward, the medical team fought to save the girls. The two younger ones, Amara and Oledo, were in critical condition. They were unresponsive, their little bodies having suffered a severe shock. The doctor suspected poison from the symptoms. A guess confirmed when Ifeoma told him the children had eaten something and then collapsed. Chinwe, the eldest, was conscious but weak. She had vomited on the way, and that might have expelled some of the toxin from her body, possibly saving her life. They placed her on a drip and had her drink activated charcoal to absorb whatever poison remained. Ngozi stood by helplessly as nurses and doctors surrounded her daughters. Her head spun as she tried to make sense of it. One moment she was selling cassava at the market, an ordinary day, and the next, someone came shouting that her children were at the hospital. She hadn't even had time to drop her basket. It lay back at the market store, abandoned, when she fled. What happened to them? Please, what's wrong with my children? She begged the nurse, her voice quavering, as the medical staff moved with urgency. The nurse gently guided her away from the road, where the doctors were working on Amara and Oledo, trying to intubate and provide oxygen. Madam, we suspect they ate something poisonous, the nurse said softly, but even she looked uncertain and scared. We are doing everything we can. Ngozi's husband, Emeka, arrived shortly after. Someone had found him at the workshop where he repaired bicycles in the village. He ran into the hospital ward and found his wife near collapse, clinging to the nurse's hands. When she saw him, she cried out and fell into his chest. Emeka, our children, was all she could say before breaking into sobs. Emeka's heart felt like it had been gripped by an iron fist. He gently peeled his wife off him, enough to look into her eyes, his own face ashen. What happened? Where are they? She pointed a trembling hand to the ER beds. The sight that met Emeka's eyes made him sway. Amara lay motionless, a doctor pumping her chest, doing CPR, a nurse bagging ventilation for her. Little Oledo was on another bed, an IV in her arm, and a monitor beeping urgently as another team of medics surrounded her. And Chinwe was on a third bed, pale but looking around weakly. Mama, Papa, Chinwe murmured when she saw her parents through the blur of activity. A nurse by Chinwe's side motioned for the parents to come over. They hurried to her, tears streaming down Ngozi's face. Emeka held onto his wife's hand tightly as they reached their daughter's side. Chinwe, my dear, what happened? He asked, voice rough with emotion. Chinwe's eyes filled with tears upon seeing her parents' faces. She tried to speak, her throat dry and voice feeble. Auntie Uloma, give us yam porridge, she whispered. Each word took effort. It tasted bad. Then Amara and Ola fell. Ngozi inhaled sharply, a mix of confusion and downing horror on her face. Uloma gave you yam porridge? She repeated, hardly believing what she heard. She told me not to tell, Chinwe added, but her voice was fading. The effort was too much. She had been through a terrible ordeal. A wave of dizziness washed over her. The nurse gently interrupted. She needs to rest. We have given her something to help her sleep and heal. No, stay with me, Chinwe, Ngozi pleaded, but the nurse assured her, your daughter will be alright, madam. She's stable for now, just needs time. Please, trust us. Before she drifted off, Chinwe managed to add one final word, her eyes locking onto her mother's. Poison. That word sent a jolt through both parents. Emeka felt as if the ground had slipped from beneath his feet. He turned to look at Ngozi, whose expression had transformed from fear to fury and despair. The doctor, who was attending the younger girls, approached them, pulling down his face mask. His face was grim. I'm very sorry. He began quietly, directing his words to both parents, but mainly to Emeka, who seemed slightly more composed than a trembling mother. We did everything we could. A wail erupted from Ngozi as she sensed what the doctor was about to say. No, please, no! She cried, covering her ears, unwilling to accept the words. The doctor's eyes were full of sympathy and sorrow. Your daughters, Amara and Oledo, they didn't make it. The poison was too strong. And by the time they arrived here, it was already... I'm sorry. Ngozi's legs gave out and she collapsed to the floor of the hospital, kneeling in agony. Emeka caught her or sank down with her, both of them kneeling on the cold tiles as the weight of the doctor's words hit them like a sledgehammer. Dead? They are gone? No, God, no! Emeka's voice broke. Tears he had been holding back now flowed freely down his cheeks. He was a strong man by all accounts, but in that moment, he felt utterly powerless and broken. He clutched his wife to his chest as she sobbed uncontrollably, her cries raw and piercing. The hospital staff stepped back to give the grieving parents space. Some turned away, wiping their own tears. The loss of two young lives was a tragedy that touched even the hardened hearts of emergency workers. Amidst the storm of grief that consumed her, one thought burned in Ngozi's mind like a brand. Uloma. How could it be true? How could the soft-spoken Auntie Uloma be responsible? Yet, Chinwe's faint words echoed in her ears. Auntie Uloma gave us yam porridge. She told me not to tell. Poison. Ngozi's sorrow began to mix with white-hot anger and confusion. She pulled away from her husband's embrace, her eyes wild and red. She killed them. Ngozi spat, voice trembling, not just with grief now, but with rage. Uloma killed my babies! How do we know? Emeka stuttered, still reeling. Chinwe, maybe she was confused. But deep down, he knew his daughter wasn't likely to lie about something like that in such a moment. and there was no reason for her to mention Uloma unless it was true. Before they could say anything further, a police officer entered the ward. The hospital had notified the police about a suspected poisoning case involving children. Such a serious incident demanded investigation. The officer approached the parents respectfully. He was a middle-aged man with a somber expression. "I am very sorry for your loss," he said. "We have to ask some questions about what happened to find out how this tragedy occurred." Ngozi stood up on shaky legs, wiping her tears with the end of her wrapper. There was a fierce determination in her now. "It was Uloma," she said hoarsely. "My husband's brother's wife. My daughter said Uloma gave them food. She did this." The officer nodded and jotted in a small notepad. He had heard from the neighbors who brought the children in that an aunt was involved. "Where is this woman now?" he asked. Emeka looked around, realization dawning that Uloma was not present. I don't know. She lives with us. She should be at home." Or he recalled the neighbor's story. "The children were found at home and taken here. Uloma wasn't mentioned beyond giving them food. Perhaps she ran." The thought made his stomach lodge. "I will send officers to your compound immediately to find her," the policeman said. He made a quick call on his radio, summoning colleagues and giving them the address. "I want to go," Ngozi insisted, her voice sharp with the edge of vengeance. "I need to see her. I need to see the woman who murdered my children." Her whole body trembled as she said those words. "Ngozi, please." Emeka reached out to hold her hand. He too wanted answers, but he feared what his wife might do if they faced Uloma now. "Let the police handle it." She rounded on him, eyes blazing through tears. "Handle it? Were they there when our daughters died? This is family. I will not rest until she pays for what she has done." The officer gently interjected. "Madam, I understand your anger, but if she truly did this, she will face justice. We will take her into custody. You must be careful. We don't want anyone else getting hurt tonight." Ngozi clenched her jaw. Part of her knew the officer was right, but every part of her soul screamed for immediate retribution. However, her raging emotions were suddenly pulled back by a weak sound from the bed. She heard Chinwe moan softly in her sleep, perhaps reacting to the noise. That sound cooled Ngozi's fury just enough. Her surviving child still needed her. "Stay with Chinwe, please," she said to her husband. "I will go with the police to find Uloma." "I have to." Emeka hesitated. He didn't want his wife to confront Uloma in her state, but he also knew Ngozi well enough to realize nothing he said would stop her. And truthfully, he wanted to confront his brother's wife too, even if he was reeling in disbelief. "I will come," he said, squaring his shoulders, though his eyes were hollow with grief. "We will both go." The officer agreed to take them, ensuring they would allow the police to lead. Another nurse promised to watch over Chinwe in their absence, urging the parents to go and return quickly. Within minutes, a police van pulled up outside the hospital. 2 more officers had joined, and they headed towards the family compound with lights flashing. The sun had dipped lower now, late afternoon shadows stretching as the vehicle came to a halt in front of the compound gate. Word traveled fast in a village, and a small crowd of villagers had already gathered at a respectful distance, sensing the gravity of the situation. Whispers fluttered among them. "They say Uloma poisoned the children. 2 are dead." "Uloma? That white woman? Impossible." "But who else?" The child spoke her name. The police entered the compound first, with Emeka and Ngozi following close behind. The yard was quiet, the bench knocked over, plates of spilled yam porridge still on the ground where they had fallen. The sight of those plates and the orange stain on the dirt made Ngozi let out a choked cry. Just as ago, her children were alive, playing and eating right here. "Uloma," Emeka called in a booming voice that carried his anguish and anger. "Uloma, come out here now." There was no response. One of the officers tried the door to Uloma's house. It was slightly ajar. They pushed in, guns drawn cautiously. Though in a small village like this, it was rare to encounter armed resistance. Procedure was procedure. The house was empty. A single plate with some porridge residue sat on the table inside, as if someone had been about to eat and left it there. The police fanned out to search. One checked behind the house and immediately called out, "Sir, over here." In the back of the compound, near the plantain trees, they found Uloma. She was crouched on the ground, back against the wall, arms around her knees, rocking slightly. Next to her lay an empty cooking pot and a large dark stain of something spilled on the soil. The sharp smell of palm oil and spice hung in the air, and mixed with it was a chemical smell that made the officer wrinkle his nose. As the police approached her, Uloma looked up. Her face was streaked with tears and dust. She appeared dazed, like someone lost in a nightmare. When she saw Emeka and Ngozi behind the officers, however, her eyes widened in fear and shame. "You!" Ngozi hissed, stepping forward before anyone could restrain her. The police didn't stop her as she marched right up to Uloma. Emeka was close behind, his fist clenched at his side, as if restraining himself from striking out. Uloma scrambled to her feet unsteadily, pressing herself back against the wall. "Sister, she began, her voice hoarse. "Don't you dare call me sister!" Ngozi spat, her voice trembling. Her grief poured out as fury now. "What did my little girls ever do to you? How could you, Uloma? How could you?" Uloma's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. What could she possibly say? She glanced at Emeka, whose face was contorted in pain and disgust. Her lips quivered. I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to. I was..." She stammered. "Where are my daughters now, Uloma?" Ngozi demanded, stepping closer. Tears ran down her face as she shouted, "Amara and Oledo are dead. Dead because of you." Each word was like a slap. Uloma's legs gave way and she fell to her knees with a strangled cry. She covered her face with her hands as if to block out the reality of what she had done. No, please, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for them to die," she wailed. The admission hung in the air. The murmurs of the small crowd beyond the gates grew louder. Some had crept closer to peek in. The police officer in charge stepped forward and pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "Uloma, we are placing you under arrest for the suspicion of murder and attempted murder," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. Even he was shaken by the scene of raw grief and guilt before him. One officer gently pulled Ngozi back to give space as the lead officer took Uloma's wrist and snapped the cuffs on. Uloma hardly resisted. She was limp and sobbing, repeating, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Like a broken record, but her apologies only made Ngozi's anger flare hotter. "Sorry? You are sorry?" Ngozi cried. "My children are gone. How will sorry bring them back? Why would you do this to us, Uloma? Why?" Her voice cracked on the last word, anguish overwhelming her again. Emeka put a hand on her shoulder as tears rolled down his own cheeks, but he stayed silent. There was no words he could muster for his brother's wife. This woman he thought he knew, now unmasked as someone who had committed an unspeakable act. Uloma lifted her face, swollen eyes darting between the policeman and the family she betrayed. Her gaze landed on Emeka, her husband's brother, who had treated her like a sister. Seeing the devastation on his face, something inside her shattered completely. "I was jealous," she cried out, her voice rising shrill in the evening air. "I had no child. I was in pain. I lost myself. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Her confession was cut off by her own sobbing. The villagers watching gasped and shook their heads. Some put their hands over their mouths in shock. To hear it confirmed was almost beyond belief. A few started cursing under their breath. "Abomination! Aru!" one old woman hissed. "An evil heart hiding in our midst all this time," a man muttered angrily. The police officer pulled Uloma to her feet. "That's enough," he said, not unkindly but firmly. They began to lead the crying woman out of the compound. As they passed by Ngozi and Emeka, Uloma stopped, looking at Ngozi with tear-filled eyes. Ngozi, I have no excuse. Get her out of my sight, Ngozi said in a low, dangerous tone. If I ever see her again, I don't know what I would do. Her whole body shook with barely contained rage. Taking heed, the officers guided Uloma forward. Emeka and Ngozi followed behind. Walking as if in a bad dream, the villagers parted to let the police escort their prisoner to the van. When Uloma emerged, a few people shouted at her, "Wicked woman! Children murderer!" One woman even threw a handful of sand in her direction, a traditional curse and sign of disdain. Uloma flinched, but said nothing, eyes cast down. Her tears fell to the ground, mixing with the dust. In a matter of minutes, the police had her in the van and drove off, likely heading to the station in town to formally book her. As the crowd dispersed, whispering furiously amongst themselves, Ngozi and Emeka stood there in the dimming daylight, utterly exhausted and numb. The realization hit that they would be returning home to a house that would never again hear the laughter of Amara and Oledu. Only silence awaited them, silence and a single injured child fighting for her life in the hospital. That night was the darkest of Ngozi's life. Back at the hospital, after giving formal statement to the police, she and Emeka sat by Chinwe's bedside. The little girl lay still, eyes closed, an IV attached to her small arm. Though the doctor assured them Chinwe was stable and likely to recover, she remained unconscious for now, her body coping with the trauma and medication. The world seemed to have collapsed around Ngozi. In one terrible afternoon, she lost 2 children and discovered a cruel betrayal by someone she considered family. As she held Chinwe's tiny hand in hers, she felt as if she was holding on to her last shred of sanity. The pain in her chest was so great, she wondered if her heart would physically break. Emeka sat quietly on the other side of the bed, head in his hands. Occasionally, a sob would shudder through his shoulders. He had wept openly at first, but now he had turned silent, tears drying into a numb expression. He kept replaying moments in his mind. Did we miss any signs? Could I have known? This was his brother's wife. They had grown up together in part. She had been in their family for years, and his own brother, away on business in another town, had no idea yet that his wife had destroyed their family. That would be another reckoning when Chike, Uloma's husband, returned and learned of this horror. Through the night, relatives and friends came to the hospital to console them. Ngozi's older sister arrived with eyes red from crying. She had heard and rushed over. She embraced Ngozi tightly, rocking with her as Ngozi wept afresh in her arms. Emeka's cousins came and shook their heads in sorrow, offering quiet words of comfort that did little to ease the agony. Even the village pastor came to pray with them briefly, though words of prayer felt hollow to Ngozi at the moment. "The Lord gives and the Lord takes," he said gently. "We cannot question his reasons, but he will comfort you in time." Ngozi could not respond to that. Anger flashed in her at the notion that God allowed this to happen. Still, she stayed quiet, her grief too deep for argument. She simply stroked Chinwe's hand, willing her to wake and be all right. By morning, Chinwe had made it through the worst. Her fever from the toxin subsided, and she was breathing normally. The doctor said it was safe to move her out of intensive care, with no other beds available for long-term stay, and likely due to cost concerns as the family wasn't wealthy. By the next evening, they brought her home. The homecoming, meant to be a joyous event under normal circumstances, was unbearably painful. Neighbors had helped clean up the compound. The spilled food and any signs of the tragedy were wiped away. But the absence hung heavy. The little sandals of Amara and Oledo still sat by the doorway, as if waiting for their owner's feet. Toys were strewn in a corner of the yard, remnants of a life suddenly cut short. Ngozi broke down when she saw those tiny sandals. She hugged them to her chest and sobbed as fresh as the first moment in the hospital. Emeka gently pried them from her grip, and guided her inside, where family members had already removed the children's bodies from the morgue for burial preparations. In Igbo custom, the death of young children is often handled quietly and quickly, as it is considered a deeply sorrowful event, not one to be prolonged with elaborate rites. The very next day, under a grey sky that seemed to share the village's grief, Amara and Oledo were buried. They were laid to rest in small coffins near a shade tree at the edge of the family land. The community gathered, women cried, and men stood with solemn faces as the earth was shoveled over the graves. Ngozi felt as if she was in a trance. She moved through the funeral rites like a ghost of herself, supported on either side by female relatives. Her eyes were swollen, her voice gone from wailing throughout the night. She had held each child one last time before the coffins were closed, kissing their cool foreheads and smoothing their hair as if tucking them into bed. Those images would stay with her forever. Amara's usually smiling face now lifeless, only those little fingers that used to cling to her now still and cold. It was a grief no mother should have to endure. Beside her, Chinwe stood with the help of her father. She was weak, but insisted on attending her sister's burial. She didn't fully comprehend death before, but now it hit her that she would never see her playmates, her best friends again. Chinwe cried softly against her father's side. Emeka himself looked like a broken man, eyes distant, arms holding onto his surviving daughter, as if he might lose her too if he let go. One person notably absent at the funeral was Oloma. She remained in police custody, locked in a cell. Even if she hadn't been, no one would have allowed her near the burial. The villagers likely would have torn her apart in their anger. Word had spread widely by now, and nearly everyone in the community was condemning her action. Many struggled to reconcile the quiet, polite woman they thought they knew with the calculating murderer revealed in this tragedy. A few neighbors recalled moments, perhaps they now made sense, like how Uloma sometimes avoided conversations about children, or how her smile never reached her eyes when others celebrated births. Hindsight gave hints that she harbored resentment, but no one imagined it ran this deep. In the days following, an uneasy atmosphere hung over the village. The compound that had been filled with laughter was now enveloped in mourning. Relatives stayed with Ngozi and Emeka, helping with chores, cooking meals none of the immediate family had the appetite to eat. Custom demanded they try to comfort the grieving family, but there was only so much they could do. Ngozi barely spoke. She moved like a shadow in her own home, often going into what used to be the children's bedroom and sitting there for hours, touching their remaining clothes and whispering their names. She would whisper, Amara, Oledo, as if calling them for dinner like she used to, and then remembering they were gone, she would break down again. Many of the women were worried she might become depressed or even try to harm herself in her despair, so they kept close watch, giving her what support they could. Emeka was torn between his own grief and worrying for his wife and daughter. He had another storm to face as well. He had spoken to his younger brother Chike, Oloma's husband. When he returned upon hearing the news, Chike had rushed to the village in shock and anguish, unable to believe his wife would do such a thing. There was a heated confrontation between the two brothers outside the police station where Oloma was held. Chike shouted that it couldn't be true, that there was some mistake, but Emeka, voice raw from yelling, recounted what Chinwe said and what Oloma herself admitted. In the end, Chike broke down in tears right there on the roadside, apologizing over and over to his elder brother. Chike was devastated. Not only had he lost his beloved little nieces, but his own wife was the cause. The shame and sorrow were almost too much for him to bear. He confided in Emeka quietly that if found guilty, he would never take her back as a wife. He could never forgive such evil. It was a stance the whole family supported. Blood or not, Oloma had committed an abomination. Meanwhile, some villagers were not satisfied with leaving the matter entirely to the police and courts. In many communities, such personal and moral tragedies are also addressed by traditional councils. The elders of Amurike village convened a meeting about a week after the incident. They could see how the event had torn the community's fabric. Some people, mostly friends or relatives of Oloma, were still in disbelief and quietly wondered if perhaps she was being falsely accused. Others sided with Ngozi's family, demanding that Uloma be not only punished by law but also banished for bringing such a curse upon their land. The village was divided by rumors and questions. How could a member of their community do this? Could there have been supernatural influence? Some even speculated if Uloma used dark charms or witchcraft. And importantly, what should the community do to ensure justice and restore peace? The elders, grey-haired men, and a couple of respected women leaders sat in a circle under the big Odala fruit in the village square. It was a solemn gathering, with many villagers watching from the sidelines. The local chief, a dignified old man named Ichie Okafor, cleared his throat and addressed the assembly. This meeting today is painful, he began. We have lost two innocent children. Our hearts are heavy. We know who is accused of this terrible act, one of our own, a woman who lived quietly among us. We must find out the truth and decide the right course of action as a community. The law will do its part, but we too must do ours to cleanse the evil that has visited us. There were murmurs of agreement. One elder, Okeke, shook his head sadly. In all my 70 years, I have never heard of such a thing. Someone poisoning children out of jealousy. This is an abomination. Aro, if it is true, such a person cannot be allowed to live among us. A middle-aged man who was a cousin of Uloma spoke up, voice quivering. Perhaps, elders, I want to believe my cousin is innocent. She has always been gentle and kind. Could it be that the children ate something bad on their own? Maybe food poisoning or some spoiled fruit. It was the first time anyone openly voiced a doubt about Uloma guilt in a public setting. A few villagers nodded, hoping this nightmare had another explanation, but another voice caught through the crowd. It was Ifoma, the neighbor, who first found the children and rushed them to the hospital. I saw them with my own eyes, she said loudly, stepping forward. Chinwe, the surviving girl, told us right away that her auntie Uloma gave them the food. I carried Amara in my arms. I smelled that food on her. Something was in it. There is no question to me that Uloma did this, the crowd buzzed. The man who tried to defend Uloma fell silent, tears of frustration in his eyes. He wanted to defend his king, but in the face of such testimony, it was hard. Chike, Uloma's husband, was present at this meeting too. He had insisted on being there despite his shame. He had been quiet until now, but finally he spoke, voice low and broken. I have spoken with my wife at the police cell. She confessed to me in private that she did it. Gasps erupted. That she did it. He had to pause to swallow the lump in his throat. She told me she lost control of herself because of jealousy and bitterness in her heart. I couldn't believe my ears, but it's the truth. Uloma admitted it to me. I am sorry. I am so sorry. His voice cracked, and he bowed his head, choking back sobs. The admission from Uloma's own husband sealed the general opinion of the gathering. Even those who had doubts now lowered their heads in sorrowful acceptance. Some women began crying softly, recalling the two bright little girls lost. As the discussion continued, a small voice suddenly piped up from the edge of the crowd. I saw Auntie Uloma that day. Heads turned to find the source. Standing hesitantly was a boy of about 8 years old named Obina. He lived in the neighboring compound that shared a back fence with Ngozi's family yard. He fidgeted as all eyes turned to him. Children rarely spoke in such meetings, but this was important. One elder beckoned him gently. Obina, come forward and speak. Don't be afraid, my son. Just tell us what you saw. Obina stepped into the center, wringing his hands. His father stood behind him, placing a supportive hand on his shoulder. Go on, tell them, the father urged softly. Obina took a deep breath. I was behind our house fetching water from the back tap on that day when I heard a noise from the compound, he said, nodding toward where Ngozi and Emeka sat. The bereaved parents were present, though they were silent and somber during this meeting, holding hands tightly. I was curious, so I looked through a gap in the fence. I saw Auntie Uloma. He paused. voice shaking. An elder encouraged him quietly. What was she doing, child? She was behind her house, pouring something. It looked like food. She threw it under the plantain trees, and then she threw up the pot too, Obina said. His small face was tense, remembering. She looked very frightened. Then she ran back inside. Another wave of whispers swept through the assembly. The evidence was mounting. The testimony of Chinwe neighbors, the confession to her husband, and now this boy's eyewitness account of Uloma disposing of the poisoned food and pot. One of the elders, a tall man named Dike, who was also knowledgeable about traditional medicine, raised his voice. We found the pot and the remnants of the yam porridge behind the house, he said, gesturing to another elder who held a clothes bundle, presumably containing sample or items found. I took a look at the scene myself, and I could smell the distinct scent of a certain chemical in the food. It smelled like gamalin, the pesticide. This made sense. Rat poison or pesticides often have a strong chemical odor. Dike continued. Such poison is not natural to food. It had to be added deliberately. An elder herbalist, Mame Fine, who was revered for her knowledge of herbs and traditional medicine, stepped forward, leaning on her walking stick. I also examined a bit of what was left on the ground, she said in a firm voice, and I recognized something mixed in the vomit I found near where the children fell. Were traces of a plant substance. There is a poisonous herb that, when prepared, can cause the kind of symptom the girls had: vomiting, foaming, collapse. She closed her eyes sadly. It is not a common herb to have around. In fact, I know only one person in our area who grew that plant in her backyard for supposed medical use. Oloma. All eyes widened at this revelation. Oloma had indeed kept a small garden of medicinal and culinary herbs, a hobby of hers. Many thought nothing of it. Some women kept gardens, but apparently one of those plants had a dark use. She had the leaves of a very poisonous plant in her garden, Mami Fanny said gravely. I once cautioned her, asking why she grew it, and she said she knew how to handle it for controlling rodents naturally. I suspected that plant substance may have been used along with the chemical. A shudder passed through the crowd. The evidence presented by the herbalist was the final nail. Even if someone had clung to doubt, they could no longer. The truth was clear. Unoma had deliberately poisoned the yam porridge with a red toxic herb and likely some pesticide, and she alone had the means to do it at hand. Tears flowed freely among onlookers as they imagined the scene, and anger swelled too. Mothers in the audience wept and held their own children tighter. Fathers shook their heads in disgust that under their watch such evil happened. Ichioka, for the chief, raised a hand to call for order after the murmurs grew loud. We have had enough, he declared. The evidence is overwhelming. By both modern law and our traditional justice, Oloma has committed one of the worst crimes imaginable. She took innocent lives through deceit and poison, a cowardly and abominable act. In our custom, such an act brings a curse and cannot be tolerated. Everyone listened intently. It was time to decide the community's stance. The chief continued, voice heavy. The police and court will try her for murder. This is out of our hands, and rightly so, for no one should escape the law. But as a community, we too must send a strong message and cleanse our land of this evil. I propose that Uloma be banished forever from our village, never to return. This land will not accept someone who has done such a thing. There was unanimous agreement voiced. People raised their hands and voices too to support the decision. Yes, she must be banished. Never again should her shadow darken this place. She is not one of us anymore. Chike, wiping his tears, stood and spoke in a sorrowful tone. I, as her husband, will never accept her back. I support the decision of the council. I disown her as my wife from this day. He covered his face after saying this. The humiliation and heartbreak apparent. It was a tragic moment for him too, divorcing and banishing his wife, a woman he once loved deeply, because of her unforgivable deed. but he had no choice. It was the only way to restore some honor and peace. With that resolution reached, the elders set the following day for a formal announcement in the village square. They would perform a simple ritual to seal the banishment. Often, this might involve a symbolic sweeping of the footprint or breaking a pot to signify casting out the evil. The next morning, in the village square, under the bright morning sun, practically everyone in America gathered. Even school was delayed that day so that the children could attend and learn a lesson from what had happened. People stood in a wide circle. On one side, Ngozi, Emeka and Chinwe was seated, surrounded by supportive family members. Chinwe was still weak, but she insisted on coming with her parents. She wanted to see herself that Uloma would be gone. On the other side, flanked by police to ensure her safety and custody, was Uloma. She had been brought in just for this proceeding. She looked pale and thin, as if she had barely eaten in the days since the incident. Her eyes remained downcast. She had a loose scarf draped over her head, and she never lifted her gaze from the ground, not even to seek out sympathy from the crowd, of which there was none. Next to her stood Chike, the husband she had lost through her actions. He looked at her with an expression not of love, but of profound disappointment and sorrow. The chief elder raised a hand for quiet, and the murmuring crowd settled into an expectant hush. We gathered today to finally close a chapter of darkness in our community, he began. Though nothing can bring back the lives lost, we as a people must take action to ensure our community heals and that such evil is firmly cast away from us. He nodded to one of the elders who brought forward a clay pot. Another brought a long broom made of palm fronds. These were symbolic tools for what was about to happen. In a loud, clear voice that carried across the square, the chief announced, Uloma, daughter of Onyema, wife of Chike, you have been found guilty by our community of shedding innocent blood through the act of poison. This is a crime not only against the family, but against the entire village and our ancestors. By our customs and by the evidence seen, you are hereby banished from Amorike village forever. You will take nothing with you but the clothes on your back. You will leave and never return. If you set foot here after today, the land itself will reject you, and the people will enforce this decree. Some villagers shouted in agreement. A few women spitting on the ground in disgust, as if to show how they rejected her presence. Uloma flinched at the harsh words and the venom in the voices around. Tears streamed down her face, but she dared not to make a sound. The chief then took a clay pot from the elder. In a stern voice, he said, as this pot breaks, so is the bond between Uloma and this community breaking. With that, he hurled the clay pot down onto the hard ground. It shattered into countless pieces. Several people stepped back as the shards scattered. Next, another elder took the broom and began to sweep the ground around where the pot had broken and in the direction of the village gate. He swept vigorously, as if chasing something out, chanting, we sweep away the evil, we sweep away the poison, we sweep away the sorrow from our land. The crowd watched in silence, the atmosphere thick with emotion. Many believed deeply in the power of such symbolism. Even those who were more modern-minded showed respect for the ritual. Finally, the chief looked at Uloma directly for the first time and said, Uloma, you have heard. Go, leave now and do not look back. For a moment, Uloma remained kneeling, shaking with sobs. Then Chike, her now former husband, spoke quietly to her. It's time for you to go, he said, not unkindly but firmly. He had arranged earlier that her few belongings would be sent to her maternal home in another town. She truly had nothing now. No husband, no home, no place among those people. Uloma slowly rose to her feet, wobbling slightly. She dared a glance at the family she had wronged. Her eyes met Ngozi's for just a split second. In them, Ngozi saw a misery so deep for a moment it almost looked like the old Uloma, the one with hidden sadness, but it was too late for any empathy to reach across. Uloma tried to speak, but her voice cracked. She managed to utter, I'm sorry. I don't know how to say how sorry. Go! Shouted someone from the crowd impatiently, and others echoed, some even taking a menacing step forward. The police officer at Oloma's side nudged her gently, indicating she should start walking. With her head bowed and shoulders slumped, Oloma began to walk across the square toward the road that led out of the village. The crowd parted as she approached, people moving away as if she carried a foul odor. A few villagers couldn't resist hurling final words at her. Shame! Child killer! May God have mercy on you because we cannot! She winced at each other, but she kept walking. As she passed by the area where Ngozi and her family stood, Uloma paused. She looked in their direction, tears flowing. In a voice choked with remorse, she addressed them directly, even as she kept a safe distance. Ngozi, Emeka, Chinwe, she said slowly, each name like a plea. There are no words left. I have destroyed my own family and yours. Jealousy blinded me, made me a monster. I regret it every day for the rest of my life. She fell to her knees unexpectedly and clapped her hands in the gesture of begging. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, and I will not ask for it. Just want to say I'm truly, truly sorry for the pain I caused. I will carry the guilt forever. There was a heavy silence. Only Chinwe's quiet sobbing could be heard as she listened to her aunt's final apology. Ngozi stepped forward at a pace, looking down at the woman who had been a part of her family and yet harbored such deadly envy. Her own eyes were wet, but her face was set. Uloma, she said, voice steady but brimming with sorrow. I trusted you. I cared for you like a sister. My children loved you. We paid all that with blood. I cannot ever forget that. Maybe one day God in heaven can forgive you, but I am not God. She held sharply to control her emotions. Leave now. That's all I can say. Just leave. Uloma nodded, broken. She stood up again, and with that, she turned and resumed walking. She left the village as the crowd watched in silence. She did not look back even once. When she had gone far down the road, disappearing from sight, the collective breath of the village seemed to exhale. The evil had been cast out, but the aftermath remained. Chike announced quietly to the elders that he would be going away for a while to stay with the relatives, to recover from the ordeal and figure out his life anew. Now as a man without a wife, they understood and wished him well, feeling sympathy for him as another victim of this tragedy. The community then focused on comforting the family that had suffered so much. After the banishment, many villagers came up to Ngozi and Emeka, offering condolences again, as if the wound has reopened, though in truth it had never closed. They praised Chinwe for her bravery and survival. They vowed collectively to be more vigilant of silent jealousy in their midst, having learned a harsh lesson. One of the elder women gently hugged Ngozi and said, my dear, no one could have known what was in her heart. Do not blame yourself for anything. Sometimes the devil finds a home even in quiet places. We will all remember your girls. They will be remembered every year when we tell this story, so others learn from it. Ngozi, still numb, nodded politely at the words. She appreciated the intentions, but no amount of communal support could fill the void left by her daughters. As the gathering dispersed and people returned to their daily business, the family retreated to their own much emptier compound. The afternoon sun was bright and unforgiving, casting stark shadows. Everything looked the same, yet nothing was the same. Ngozi and Emeka sat with Chinwe under the mango tree in the yard, the very spot where the three sisters had played just over a week ago. The air was thick with memory. Chinwe leaned against her mother, who wrapped an arm around her protectively. Emeka cleared his throat and knelt in front of his wife and child. His face was earnest and full of sorrow. Ngozi, he began softly, reaching out to hold his wife's free hand. I need to say something to you. Ngozi looked at him, her eyes questioning. In the flurry of events, they had hardly spoken about anything beyond immediate concerns. I want to beg you for forgiveness, Emeka said, bowing his head. Ngozi was taken aback. Forgiveness? For what? You did nothing wrong, my husband. He squeezed her hand, tears filling his eyes yet again. I didn't protect our children from evil that was right in our home. I didn't see the danger. I was blind because it was my own brother's wife. Maybe I ignored signs. Maybe I didn't take seriously how much she was hurting. I'm so sorry I failed you and our girls. His voice cracked with guilt. When you first told me what Chinwe said, a part of me hesitated to believe it. I let brotherly love cloud my judgment, even for a moment for that. I feel I betrayed our family. I am deeply sorry, Ngozi. Fresh tears slipped down Ngozi's cheeks. As she listened, she realized this was something that had weighed on him. His stern loyalties during those early hours. She remembered how he had said, how do we know for sure? Initially, but she also remembered how, once the truth became undeniable, she stood firmly by them. She shook her head and gently pulled him closer into an embrace, which included Chinwe too. My husband, we have both suffered so much. You did not fail us. The only person who failed us was Oloma, and she alone carries that blame. You were as blindsided as I was. None of us saw this coming. She stroked his back as he silently wept into her shoulder. I forgive you for any doubt you had. I understand. She fooled everyone. Emeka hugged his wife and daughter tightly. They remained like that for a while, a small family clinging to each other in the emptiness felt behind. As days turned into weeks, life in America village slowly picked up its normal rhythm again. But the story of what happened in Ngozi's family spread beyond their community, serving as a cautionary tale. Neighbors became more attentive to those who might harbor secret resentment. People learned not to easily dismiss signs of bitterness and also to extend kindness to those silently suffering, hoping to prevent such tragedies born of envy. Ngozi stayed mostly to herself for some time, healing at her own pace and caring for Chinwe. Every corner of her house held memories of her lost daughters. The height marks on the wall where she measured them each birthday, the dresses still hanging in their side of the wardrobe, the doll that Oledo used to carry everywhere. It was overwhelming, but she found comfort in talking about the good times she had with them. Sometimes she would sit with Chinwe and they would share stories. Remember how Amara used to dance whenever she had music? Remember how Oledo would hide under the table during bath? They would laugh a little at the memories, then cry, then hold each other. Chinwe had nightmares for a while. She would dream of her sisters crying or of eating something bitter and then not finding her voice to scream. On those nights, she would run to her mother's bed and Ngozi would soothe her until she slept again. Gradually, with love and perhaps with time's mercy, those nightmares began to lessen. The community also set a new practice in honor of the lost children, and as a reminder, each year on the date of the tragedy, the village women would gather at Ngozi's home in the evening with lanterns. They would sing such hymns and tell stories to all the children about kindness and the dangers of jealousy. They urge mothers and fathers to always watch for signs of deep sadness or bitterness in those around them and to address them with compassion or alertness. It was both a memorial and a lesson sharing, ensuring that Amara and Oledo's death would not be in vain. As time went on, Ngozi gradually found the strength to start living life forward. She returned to her market trade, in part to keep herself busy, and also because she had to provide for Chinwe. Emeka threw himself into his work as well, and in the evenings spent more time with his wife and daughter than he ever used to, cherishing every moment. One evening, about a year later, Ngozi and Chinwe sat outside their house watching the sunset. The sky was painted in hues of orange and purple, and the air was cool and calm. Chinwe, now 10, rested her head on her mother's shoulder. She had grown a little taller. She even smiled and laughed again like a child should, though the memory of her sisters remained in her heart. Ngozi wrapped an arm around her daughter. They talked quietly about the day. Chinwe had done well on a school assignment. Ngozi had sold all her cassava at the market. Normal things, life moving on. Then Chinwe said, Mama, I was thinking of Amara and Ola today at school. I saw two little girls playing and laughing, and I remembered our own. Her voice was soft and reflective rather than sad. What did you feel? Ngozi asked, kissing the top of her daughter's head. I felt happy, remembering, she said, surprising herself. I was too sad, but I also felt happy that I had those times with them. Is that okay? Ngozi's eyes misted, but she smiled and nodded. It's okay. It means their memory gives you joy, and that's a good thing. It means you are healing. Chinwe snuggled closer. I hope I can be as good a big sister to any babies you might have in the future as I was to them. It was an innocent way of expressing hope, though she knew her sisters couldn't be replaced. Perhaps someday she might have another sibling to love. Ngozi's heart squeezed. It was a tender topic. She and Emeka had not tried for more children yet. The grief was still fresh, and they were a bit older now. But hearing Chinwe's wish, she held her daughter a little tighter. We will see, my dear. Whatever happens, you will always be the best sister and the best daughter. The sun dipped below the horizon, leaving the golden afterglow. Fireflies began to blink in the bushes. Ngozi took a deep breath of the evening air. She remembered how, at her darkest moment, she thought she would never feel peace or happiness again. And while a piece of her would forever ache for Amaranoledo, here she was alive with her beloved daughter by her side and the promise of tomorrow. She thought of the two small leaves under the shade tree and sent a silent prayer upward. My angels, rest well. I will never forget you. Looking at Chinwe's face, bright, resilient, and full of life, she felt a surge of love and purpose. She knew she must continue, for this child at least, if not for anything else. She whispered the words that had become her mantra over the months, especially on her hard days when despair threatened. You are my light, we will rise from this. The moral lesson of this story is that jealousy, when left unchecked, can grow into dangerous and destructive actions, harming innocent people and tearing families and communities apart. The events surrounding Chinwe Amara Anoledo show how hidden bitterness can lead to tragedy, but they also teach the importance of kindness, vigilance, and compassion toward those who may be silently struggling. The community's response, coming together to comfort the grieving family, teaching children about kindness, and remaining alert to signs of resentment, reinforces that healing requires unity and that the memory of loved ones can inspire positive change rather than hatred or blame. Thank you so much for watching this amazing story on African Stories by V. If you liked this and felt inspired, please show your support by clicking the like button, sharing with your friends, and leaving a comment below. To see more interesting stories and learn about different cultures, subscribe to African Stories by V, and do not forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Your support means a lot and helps us bring more stories to you. Until we meet again, stay connected, stay inspired, and keep smiling.